Behave yourself, Jaws. It's 11.365 carats, oval shaped, what we would call a native cut, meaning it was hand cut by eye, not to exacting standards. So it's 13.04 millimeters by 17.55 millimeters. Overall, when you look at it with the naked eye, it's a beautiful stone. However, when you examine it closely, you see that this side has more space than this side on the pavilion. It doesn't line up right. When you look at it sideways, again, this is not uniform. This one kind of has a more of an angle like that, and this kind of tapers down on this side. Then when you examine the facets, it looks like they never actually polished it. There's clear grooves in every facet. There's grooves there, scratches there. The facets aren't lined up. This one's way overcut. There's a lot of grooves you can see under magnification. There's a chip there. And that's on the pavilion side. When you look at the crown, let me show you the crown. The table itself, it's hard to see without some magnification. But when you put even the slightest magnification on, there's grooves throughout the crown. Grooves throughout the table, indicating it was not properly polished. It's a native cut and rather poorly cut. The customer certainly wants to keep it as a prized piece. Nice purple, beautiful color. I don't see any zoning. But what do you do with stone like that? So the customer wants to make it a beautifully cut stone. So the question is to repair it or recut it. The problem is the pavilion, the bottom half is not properly cut. It's not aligned properly. It has to be recut. The crown, the top half, the table needs to be polished. The facets don't match up. It basically is a recut, or at least I don't have to take it and go with very abrasive grits and as though it was a lump of rough. It's more of a preform, and we can work it from there. But every facet is going to have to be touched, at least polished, probably aligned. I don't think there'll be much loss to the weight or dimensions. Probably could line up the dimensions to make it more standardized. So it's a very good customer of ours who very much wants the stone redone. So when you get into whether it's worth it or not, we're going to do that. Would I recommend that for the average person? Would I recommend you go overseas and buy native cut stones and then have a cutter with a calibrated machine recut them? I would not recommend that. You're basically going to pay for cutting a stone, and you'd be better off picking a piece of rough and working it that way. However, if you've got a lot of sentimental value on a particular stone, I certainly can't measure your sentimental value. So the customer wants it done. Very good customer, very good friend, and so we'll take a look at it and we'll recut this stone. Although this was a native cut, I looked for some similar design to use as a format to refacet this stone. I found this design by Robert Long in facetingdiagrams.org, which seems to be similar to the way the stone currently looks and its length to width, so that'll help me lose as little of the current carat weight of the stone and the current size as possible. Now I have a two-part video on reading a gem fasting diagram, and see the link in the description. So if you aren't following what I'm about to say, refer to that video as it explains all the parts of a gem fasting diagram. Using this diagram will result in me recutting the gemstone into a stone that has the length to width ratio of 1.5. I will need to make sure I have sufficient space to cut both the pavilion and the crown. I need to use the pavilion to width ratio, the P to W, and the crown to width ratio, the C to W, to make sure I have sufficient space available in the stone to cut the proper pavilion and crown. And if I don't have sufficient length to width ratios, pavilion to width and crown to width, I'll have to shorten the width of the stone until I have the right ratio to get a 1.5. Okay, I've placed the stone in the top. I haven't glued anything, I just wanted to line it up. And the way I'm going to cut it is I'm going to glue the crown in place, leaving equal sides to the crown, kind of making that the center point for the stone. I can see already that the pavilion's way off on this side and this side. This is much shallower and this is much more steep. So we're going to start by aligning things to the table. So this is a temporary hold. I'll put some silly putty, molding wax, modeling wax underneath the bottom to hold it in place and line it up again. And then I'll put the super glue onto the table holding that, and then we'll recut the pavilion and line up the dimensions of the stone. Now I'm going to use our Loctite 404 super glue. Just takes a drop, and you want it to be on the stone and on the dot. It just takes a few seconds for that to set in. Then I'll leave it overnight to make sure it hardens properly, and we'll be ready to start cutting. Again, you can see the pavilion's not lined up right, so we'll be cutting off more of this side to line it up with the side that's more shallow. Because you can't add to a stone, you can only take away stone. But with the table being centered now, that'll make sure the pavilion is centered. So then when I transfer it back and cut the crown, the top half, we shouldn't have any problems. So let's see what happens. All right, for our recut of our amethyst oval, the first thing we do is we put it in our spindle here, and we want to line it up as close as we can. It's not cut well, so it's not oval like it should be. But what we do is we want the 96 index and the 48 index to be where the widest part, the narrow part, should be. We don't want to start cutting like this, because we're going to end up cutting this as the oval. So we just line it up by eye as best we can. The top and the bottom don't match up exactly because it was not perfectly cut. So we've set it in place and we tighten it down. And then we're going to begin recutting this stone. I'll cut it with the Crystallite solid steel disc, a 1200 diamond grit. The design I'm going to use is the 8 main oval. It has 73 total facets, and it should turn this stone back into a beautiful stone. We're going to start by cleaning up the girdle. So we will set our dial indicator to 90 degrees, which will make it flat for our girdle. So we're going to just clean up the girdle, and we'll start with those 16 facets with a 1200 grit Crystallite black. Okay, we're going to jump around with Robert Long's design, because I want to start with the girdle, and it's actually the G4. There's 4 different angles for girdles, and it's the 4th one I want to start with, because that is for the dial indicator of 2 and 94, which are the right here on the girdle. 2, 94, 46, and 50. 4 angles that are on the longest part of the stone. So for cutting the girdles, we put it on a counterclockwise rotation so the water doesn't spill in. We put in our sponge to help make sure the water doesn't fly out, because we have to lower our drip pan in order to get the stone near the lap at its flattest angle. Now we have to take off enough for the 2 facets touch each other, but we don't want to take off too much, or it's going to affect the size of the stone, the width and the length. Okay, Now we'll see if the other side's lined up. It's not. Okay, our two facets are just now touching on this side. Now our other side, we're going to have to remove more, which means it was, again, a improperly cut stone. Alright, so I pulled up the instructions. The angle for refractive index is given as 1.54, that's for quartz. The number of facets is shown, and this matters. The P divided by W, that's your pavilion divided by the width of the stone. And this stone has a rather shallow pavilion, so the stone's about 12 millimeters wide. That'll give us about 8 millimeters I need of pavilion, and I have about that, so I'm okay with this diagram. Now what I've just done is I cut the G4 first, 2 and 94, 2, 46, 50, and 94. So 48 and 96 is the top and the bottom. So 42, so I cut these two facets until they touched. So 2 and 94, and then I went down to the 46 and 50 facets, and I cut those two till they matched. When I finished the top two, the bottom two didn't touch, so I had to cut till the bottom two, these two facets touched right here, and then I went back to the top and cut those two facets. So now I've got my width set, and now I'll proceed with the rest of the girdle facets, and they're all at 90 degrees, and then I'll go back to cutting the rest of the pavilion. Okay, I've finished pre-polishing the girdle on our amethyst. Now, the only thing to be very careful about when cutting an oval is that you get the length and the width correct. This design calls for a length and width ratio of 1.5. So whatever the width is, you multiply by 1.5 to get the length. And if you don't get your length and width right, your breaks, your lines on your facets are not going to line up with the girdle. I pretty much eyeballed the girdle around to make it an even width as I was pre-polishing, but now that I'm done with the final pre-polish, they line up just right where a line from the pavilion facet comes right at the breaks the line between the girdle facets, so it's lined up correctly. I think I'll use one of my favorite polishes for a amethyst or quartz, and that's a cerium oxide ultra lap, and I get those from Ultratech, but there's a lot of dealers that sell them. So the way they work, you need a strong platform to sit them on because they're just a flexible plastic disc with cerium oxide embedded in it. And you know which side to use because one side is very shiny, that's the back, and the side that's a little bit duller is the part with cerium oxide on it. So you put some drops of water on your base plate, and in this case I'm using a ceramic lap because it's the most perfectly flat lap there is, and it makes a good base plate for our toppers or our ultra laps. And by putting those drops of water down, it helps it hold the lap in place. So now I'm going to polish the girdle. Girdle polished up beautifully, and of course the best way to get a quick and good polish is to spend the right amount of time on a pre-polish and get a good pre-polish. So there are fasteners that do not bother with faceting with polishing the girdle. I do. I think it makes it more beautiful. And there are some that, and sometimes I do this also, instead of 90 degrees, we'll use 89, 88, 87 degrees so that you're just polishing the very top part of that girdle and not the bottom part, which is going to be the crown. And the reason sometimes I do that and the reason that some other fasteners always do that is because it's just going to be the first 0.3 to 0.5 of a millimeter of girdle when you're done. The rest is going to be cut off when you cut the crown. So since you're never going to see it, it's going to get cut away, there's no reason to polish it. But in this case, I polished the entire girdle. It was Amethyst polishes beautifully with cerium oxide. It's really no problem. So the girdle's perfectly polished all the way, even though most of it's going to get cut away when we transfer and cut the crown. So the next thing I'll do is work on these remaining facets, put a good pre-polish on them, and then again polish them up with the cerium oxide, and then we'll transfer and be ready to work on the top part or the crown of this stone. Now we're ready to go around it with the 1200 and then pre-polish it. Okay, we've finished polishing the pavilion of this amethyst that we were recutting. I added 3 angles and 10 new facets, and the reason I did that is because as I was cutting it, to save the much weight as possible, I had to add a few new angles, but it seemed to have turned out just fine on the pavilion side. The crown I should be able to cut exactly as Robert Long put into the diagram, but we'll see. So we're now ready to transfer the stone and begin cutting the crown or the upper half of the stone. Okay, we've got our amethyst set in the transfer jig. So now we'll add some of our Loctite 404 super glue. You just need a drop. Push the stone onto the glue, tighten it up. And you want to be careful to watch turn the stone as necessary just for a few seconds until the glue sets up. You want there to be super glue on both the stone as well as the dop. You don't want any of the glue coming down the side of the stone, because as we cut the crown or the top half of the stone, we're going to cut down the facet, the girdle facets, down to about between a 0.3 and a 0.5 millimeter. And if you have super glue on there, for one, you can't really see where you're cutting to, and it causes problems when you get the glue in your grinding laps. You don't need that. So keep the glue off the side of the stone, but make sure it's in the on the dop and on the stone. And then just let it set up, and we'll be ready to start cutting the top half or the crown of our amethyst. For the crown, the top half, we've just used heat to take it out of the transfer jig, and we're going to follow the diagram and the instructions from Robert Long's 8-main oval for the crown. I added 10 facets on the pavilion, or the bottom half, but for the crown I'm going to follow his design and use just the facets he needs. So the first thing we're doing is we're taking the 2 facets on the narrow side of the oval, and we're working them down to set the width of the girdle. A wire gauge works well. 0.3 is this gap right here. So you just show that gap up against the stone. And 0.5 is here. So anywhere between 0.5 and 0.3 of a millimeter will give you enough of a girdle. If you make the girdle too small, like a knife edge, a lot of times your jeweler will chip it when he's setting the stone into the piece of jewelry that it's going into. So we're using the 600 grit topper, and we'll just work it down to set the girdle width, and we'll work our way around to make a nice even girdle. So for our oval amethyst, I finished pre-polishing it with Crystal Light 1200, and all the facets are lined up. Got a nice even girdle. So now we're going to move to a cerium oxide disc to polish it, and then we'll be ready to polish the table. Alright, we're ready to cut the table of our recutting of our amethyst here. The table was already cut in the stone that was bought by the customer, and it's already lined up, but the table's the only facet I haven't recut, and it was kind of native cut, so it's got grooves in it. It's not polished well, so I'm going to repolish it. So the way you do the table is you need to put your stone that's glued to the dop at a 90-degree angle so that it's straight up and down. If you were to just use the machine and move the index to 0, you'd be at 90 degrees, but I'm at 18 degrees. If I went down to 0 degrees, it would be down here. Moving the entire arm forward, I'd be barely able to touch the lap. So if it's a small stone, you might get away with that. But for a larger stone, you wouldn't be using the entire lap to do your cutting and polishing. So you take out this brass retainer, and your Ultratech machine has a nice little place built in to put that brass screw into. You screw it in right there, because those little screws are easy to lose, and now you don't have to worry about losing it. To get your 90-degree angle the other way is you put your index at 45. You want to be at a 90-degree angle. So Ultratech has an adapter. That's a 45-degree adapter. You put the adapter on at 45, and then when you put your dop in to the adapter, you're going to be at 90 degrees. And the stone will be straight up and down 90 degrees. And I'm going to use a bat lap with 14,000 diamond grit. Got 45 degrees, I've got my lap there, so I put the table adapter in and I put the 90-degree angle in there. But the problem is, if you don't have it right, you could put it sideways wrong. So then you're going to be cutting, instead of flat, you're going to be cutting like this or that and miscutting the table. So you use the other adapter that comes with the machine, and this is a table adapter. Flat part sits on your lap, and then you're perfectly aligned. So you put the table adapter in your 90-degree adapter, you put that in. So now you're at 45 degrees and your table adapter has your stone set straight. So all you do is you tighten down the set screws with your Allen wrench in your 90-degree adapter, take out the table adapter, and now all you do is you put in your dop. And I put it in so just a little bit of the brass is showing through, because I like having a lot of space at the bottom part so I can put my fingers in there and hold the stone and adjust it. So you put that in, tighten it up, all set. Now we're set to do a 45-degree angle. Got a bat lap using our 14,000 diamond grit from Girdle. This is kind of like a chapstick, and you just put it on the lap. I'm going to clean the lap off first. So you put it on a slow spin, alcohol on a white or a piece of paper towel to remove any of the leftovers from the last time I used the 14,000 diamond grit. Now I just put on the diamond grit, and then I use water. You can use WD-40. I use water, it's a lot less messy, and I make sure that my 14,000 grit diamond is somewhat distributed over the lap. That way the stone won't be hitting a big blob of diamond grit. You use a very slow drip on this, and you bring your arm down until it just touches the stone to the lap, and you'll know when it hits the lap when the indicator starts jumping up. So you put it just above that, start at your speed. Now I'll do this as pre-polish. I'm going to use 14,000 diamond grit and then 60,000 diamond grit after this. I like to check often on when I'm polishing to look at the stone. So you just wipe off the water, take your loop, and check to see if you have any scratches or if it's polishing up nicely. And I can still see the grooves that were in there. I know the grooves were in there from before because the grooves are going lengthwise along the table, and I have my table set sidewise, so my lap, my grooves, if I had new grooves, they would be going this way, not this way. So these are the old grooves that I can see. So I need to work those out with a little bit more polishing. We're finished polishing the table of our Amethyst oval here. I finished it up after 14,000 diamond on a bat lap. I used the cerium oxide ultra lap. So we're done with the stone. So now I'll put it in the acetone and let it eat up the super glue, and stone will come right off. And it's 100 times better than it was, and we'll take a look at it.